Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to MSP Community Live after the week off. How's it going, Josh?
Not too bad. Did you enjoy your week off? Well,
Yeah.
the Thanksgiving holiday anyway. You probably didn't take the week off if you're anything
So
like me. But
I used to say when I was back when I was MSPing, that used to be one of the best maintenance windows of the entire year. You could just nobody was working. You could reboot stuff in the middle of the day. You could do downtime things. It was really actually kind of nice. So this was the first time in a while that I really had the day off, and it was nice. I didn't do all that much.
we we had traveled back to our hometown to visit family, so I did a lot without doing much. So
Mm.
mostly just driving here to see these sets of family, and driving there to go to another one, and had turkey and watched football. So all in all, not too bad.
Yeah, you need some break from the vacation. Um,
You yeah, certainly do, because now Christmas is like next week, and like I don't have any presents, so I need to get my stuff
don't
together
say
this
that.
weekend.
I know we lost a week because of
Uh,
just the way Thanksgiving fell, and it feels like Christmas is right around the corner. Um, but my focus at the moment is a sports story that's right around the corner. We're all holding our breath to see where Juan Soto ends up.
yeah,
I am, at
wait,
least.
I thought you were gonna say where Aaron Rodgers ends up after next week, but
Oh, who knows? I'm not even thinking about football. The Jets are just. I don't want to say I don't care, but I just start watching the game and you have no expectations going in, so it's actually turned into a rather stress-free thing for me. I turn the game on, maybe they'll win, probably not, and it's just entertainment at this point. There's no emotional investment anymore. Maybe
yep.
next year.
Well, hopefully by next episode we'll find out if the Mets have inked a deal, or we'll see where else he's going. But
I don't
um,
think they will. I think he's staying with the Yankees. It's possible he'll go to the Mets, but I think he'll resign with New York, other New York.
we have it in writing, so let's fast forward a week to next week's episode and find out. So stay tuned, because this is the only place you get your baseball news. So make sure
We
you
got to
tune
make
in
a
for
sports
that.
show. We
Yeah,
keep talking about it
absolutely.
every
I
week.
know. But this getting back to the task at hand here, we have a
Thanks, Josh.
handful of stories that we've picked out this week. There's quite a few really good ones to choose from, so it was a little hard this week, only picking six. But I'll let you take
Yeah, there's a
the
lot of good
first
stuff
one
this
here.
week.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead and take this first one.
There we go. Now I can read it. Okay. MSP engineer at all times on site at a customer. So I'm not going to read the entire paragraph to you. Basically, the gist of this story is that this MSP has someone that is more or less permanently assigned to a customer. Um, I'm guessing he has an office there, like he has a desk there, and ostensibly, the rationale is that one, the client just pays the MSP for this, and two, from the technicians or engineers perspective, he gets to do all the projects there and gets heavily involved. And the poster is wondering, is this a good thing? I think from both perspectives. One, from the MSP perspective, right? Is there a single point of failure issue here? And two, is this some kind of career stagnation for the engineer in that he's not exposed to what we think are one of the big benefits of MSPs, that you get to work on all sorts of stuff in different projects and architect things. So I think I did a decent job of summarizing that post. So I'll turn it over to you, Josh. What are your thoughts on, like, is this a good thing or not?
The other side too, and one of the things he brought up that I wanted to make sure that is mentioned, kind of to your point of the career stagnation, is this is a level 2 engineer who I think it seems like they recently hired him, and the reason that he left his previous job is because he wasn't exposed to projects. He got bored with more of the level 1 stuff, and one of the questions he has is, if we have a dedicated onboard engineer for this client, um, then if they give him a level 2, well, if he's the dedicated IT support, most things are going to be your level 1 tickets, and what are some things to worry about. So I
Yeah.
feel that is a valid concern. I mean, if that guy wants to do projects, um, then he's sitting there doing password resets and printer issues for this, then you might unfortunately run into the same issue. So I think the biggest thing with this, and not only in this particular scenario, but in every scenario where you're doing a staff augmentation, is clear defined roles and expectations. Because even if you're the staff augmentation there's some things that you can't do or you shouldn't be responsible for because it's not your business. So having those clear set expectations outlined and documented, signed off on, is huge. And the other thing too is make sure you price it right. This is my biggest complaints with an MSP that I was a part of, is I was that dedicated person. I was a level 3 person dedicated to our client, and they were charging me, they were billing out it was $95 an hour to this, which is, I mean, if you I because I come from a
That's
business background, that barely cover I'm not bragging, but that barely covered my salary. That's not even getting into the overhead of retirement, health insurance, the
yeah.
other things that you would expect to have to pay out for. It wasn't the right number. And when I brought that to their attention, they said, well, they buy a lot of hardware from us, so we make it back in hardware margins, which that's not how an MSP works. But there's a reason I'm not there anymore. But realize what your cogs are going to be, and make sure that it's priced right. And there are things, no, I'm not saying that I know how to run the business better than the previous thing did, but I still feel that wasn't the right number to land on, because there are things with relationships and trying to continue a long-standing relationship and things like that. But I don't know, you still need to pay your bills.
Yeah, to your point, depending on how exposed you were to the financials, there could be a situation where a lower hourly rate was made up for by paying for essentially 40 hours a week of your time, although 95 is pretty low depending on market. Although I can't think of any market where that's reasonable. That's pretty low, especially for an L3. All that being said, I agree. Price it right. And if you're going to discount the hourly rate for the sake of doing a block hour, just make sure that everybody knows you're doing that, as opposed to just saying it's the hourly rate. So we talked about the career stagnation part. I don't know that it really came up in the post, but we also had basically one guy who was parked at a client, almost full time, like, to the point where it was joking, like where we would put, like, have you seen me milk carton things on his desk in the office because we didn't see him in so long. What do you think the risk to the MSP is from that? Because I got to tell you, in my example, that guy left the company one day, and all of a sudden you go in and that client's not documented all that well. He's been doing all the work for that client, and nobody else really hits it unless he's like on vacation or something. He's been doing all the projects, so the architecture isn't really documented and known, right? It's all tribal knowledge, except the tribe is one person. That's a little bit of a concern as well. And I think one thing I'd like to point out with this is you can offer full-time staff hog, and it doesn't have to be the same person all the time. You don't have to dedicate a single resource to that client, full time, right? Whether it's 5 days a week or whatever full time is for that client. Spread that out a little bit. One, to keep them from getting bored, and two, so that when, not if, when that person leaves, you're not, standing there stranded, not knowing how to support this client anymore, and your service will take a temporary nosedive. Depending on the relationship with the client, you might not be able to overcome that period of essentially re-onboarding them to the rest of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do feel isolated from the rest of the team too. I mean, I was I was the staff augmentation for, I would say, it was a little over a year. And effectively, that was my job, as I was an employee of this other company. So I even if I had office days, I mean, most of my time was in Teams meetings or working with their stuff. So like, I really didn't know what was going on with the rest of the team or the rest of the organization, any updates or anything like that outside of answering other Microsoft 365 questions. Cause that was my specialty. So, but to your point too, then yeah, if when I left, there really, and I think my case is a little different because they also had two other internal IT members plus an IT director. So I didn't necessarily need to document things for our MSP. That wasn't in like the scope or anything like that. They had all those network diagrams and things. But when they had another person, obviously when I left, there really they weren't able to continue to do the same kind of work and tasks that I was doing. They dealt more of like a level one person where they're helping with provisioning and printers rather than like the Azure environment and kind of the high level stuff. So there's definitely an issue with that too. If you just have like this one person doing it, that was actually a good call out. That's not something that I even really thought about. And I don't think I'm seeing it anywhere in the post at all where like, hey, inevitably if that person leaves or or if they just end up getting hired by the person that you're augmenting them to, hopefully you have some sort of competitive clause in place where they can't nab them. Then it really does leave your MSP high and dry.
That's a really good point. Getting into like the contractual non-compete stuff, there's a difference between legit non-competes, which are greatly frowned upon and in some municipalities not even legal, and just ensuring that there's a high cost to the client for poaching talent, right? I've seen contracts do like a year of the client's or a year of the employee's salary or all sorts of different models like that. I don't even want to touch that. That's kind of a lightning rod issue, but do also from the MSP side realize that becomes a risk. The client, one, if you don't pay them enough, may offer a 20% raise or something to poach the employee, and just make sure that you know how you'll handle that if and when it comes up, because it will. I know in the case of my organization, the clients that we had with essentially dedicated techs did try to poach them, and some success, some not, with an exorbitant fee in the success.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, I think we covered that one. Let's go ahead and go to our next story and get the soapbox out for this one. This is something that triggers me every time that I see it. Another thing I'm trying to tackle is to boost
the lack of paragraphs. That's what I see first.
Big old run-on sentence. Trying to boost our cybersecurity penetration and awareness in customer accounts. So he's basically saying, hey, we need to increase our cybersecurity footprint with our clients, and maybe we should do some penetration testing to scare them. I am not
to scare them.
I mean, he doesn't say the word scare, but he does point out that we know people don't want to part with their money until an incident happens, then they need us. So the point of doing the penetration test is showing, hey, like this, this is, scare them into like, hey, we need to fix this, right?
That's a very expensive observability thing, unless they mean not penetration test and something else.
I mean, that's the word that the OP is using, and that's where I get a little triggered on there. And I want to point out that I'm not against penetration tests, given that they are legitimate and scoped and quoted and done by an unbiased third party that isn't the MSP, that isn't the person in charge of the environment, and they're actually performed by a professional who does those sort of things, and they're not just an automated scan. But the fact is that unless you're in a regulated industry, the amount of clients you have who are actually ready for a legitimate pen test are so few and far between There's so many more things that you can do with this other than, okay, well, we think we have good security. Let's just do the penetration testing. Well, how do you know you have good security? Like, what are you basing it on? Are you following some sort of framework, whether it's CIS or this NIST? Where are you at with those implementation? What do your policies look like? Have a roadmap, have a plan. I know I've mentioned it before. We have the cybersecurity maturity model that we use internally based off of cyber insurance and CIS controls. So we know exactly where our clients stand, what the next step is to mature them, what are the things on the roadmap. But at the end, we also have a baseline. Like, these are baseline best practices that we require as part of acceptable security for doing business with us. And that does, get you somewhere on the maturity model. But then there are obviously optional things and compliance and if I say optional, but projects and things that'll move you forward. There's no pen testing required. I mean, we have pen testing on there, but it's level 4 out of 5 on our scale, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens to get there. So that would be my answer, is like, instead of just going to the penetration testing, like what is your current stack and what is missing in there? Like, because you're probably missing something obvious, and you can save $15,000 by taking care of doing the basics really well.
So I'm going to drill into this slightly because it maybe because it was just the wall of text. It's not totally clear what the root of the question even is from that post. And the thing that jumps out to me is that this is another example of MSPs trying to sell security as some type of bolt-on add-on service. And I'm generally not a fan of that. Yes, of course, there are components of it that you don't include in the contract, or maybe came on after the initial agreement was signed or something like that. But in general, if you're talking things like MDR or some kind of SIM service or whatever, I won't name any product names, but core components. These conversations of like trying to convince your clients to purchase individual services, sometimes unavoidable, right? I recognize that, I concede that point, but I think most of the effort should be focused on getting that to be part of your standard deployment in the first place, especially for new agreements, right? If this is a relatively new customer, include all that stuff in the beginning, right? The same way that you wouldn't, in many cases, sell a client that didn't, I hope, form an agreement with a client that didn't have any backup service, right? That they then expect you to recover the server, or have an edge firewall in place. So you can argue with, if you're all SaaS, the benefits of that. Different conversation, but security products and security services are the same way, and it's not all products, right? Like, this idea that it's all products. Probably your biggest thing is starting to get into what you just mentioned in CIS benchmarks and architecting your network over a framework. So I feel like, again, I don't have all the context, and frankly, I didn't read that entire text wall. But anytime I hear this, let me try and convince my customers to buy security individual products and services, it's a little bit of a red flag to me. Conceding that there is some nuance to that maybe it's an old contract or something like that, but just keep that in mind. That's, you mentioned soapbox. That's my soapbox point. Security is part of your service.
And to Henry's point, I don't have a super duper 100 point checklist. It's really CIS controls simplified. So, I mean, it really is a CISO. And also, to Henry's point, I did use Gemini to summarize the post, which would make our jobs a lot easier when it comes to do this. We should probably be embracing this technology. But it says, the author is working on a 25 initiative to grow their existing cybersecurity practice. They're looking for ways to hook in customers who are hesitant to adopt proactive cybersecurity measures. And then in going with it, they're interested in deploying something called ConnectWise Identity. And that's where they want something to install and get the clients to realize the issues that were in there. And I'm not familiar with that particular product, but I would assume it would just based on the name. Look at like over. I, I mean, do you know what that product does before I make assumptions on it?
Yeah, but I'm really trying to stay
Here's
product
so
agnostic on
okay.
this.
So, but I guess it doesn't matter what the product does. So you're trying to install a product that shows shortcomings. But I think on the other hand of it is like if you build out your stack properly and include these security things and align to CIS or whatever framework, then they would already have that instead of making it optional.
Yeah, so my opinion on this is that there is value in being able to measure where you are against some type of benchmark, whether it's CIS benchmarks, whether it's your maturity model, whether it's if you have regulatory obligations, those frameworks and those requirements. Yes, it's good to know that. To me, and again, I realize my biased position here because I'm not in sales. I find it less valuable from a sales perspective, but that's kind of the ivory towers, like academic side of me coming out. The cold reality is that this stuff does generate sales, and you do have to keep that into account as well. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if as an MSP, we got to sell new prospects, so I do get that side of it too. But I seeing stuff like seeing anything designed to scare people used as a sales tool just really just rubs me the wrong way, even though it works. And I acknowledge it works.
Yeah, we try to avoid the FUD selling, but sometimes, I mean, like you said, the harsh reality is sometimes FUD works, and that's why it's still prevalent in the industry.
Yeah, scare tactics can be effective. So I think it's the way it's used, right? If you go into a prospect and talk about, hey, let me educate you on why frameworks are important or why this regulatory framework is important, or we're going to share our maturity model, and you really do a good job of presenting it as valuable versus tool that I won't mention the name of that generates a like 700-page report of outdated computers. That's a little different. And if you go to it really trying to show value and making sure that they get something valuable out of it, even if they don't buy from you, that to me is different than, hey, I'm going to share, this vulnerability scan. Meanwhile, 2/3 of it are like SSL headers.
Yep.
So I don't know. Maybe it's just the way it's used. I think we're going in
Agreed.
circles.
All right, use a framework. There's other things you can do that isn't a tool. So, all right, we can solve this one. Matt, you want to bring us
Yeah,
on
solved.
to the
We didn't solve it. We just
yeah.
acknowledge the nuance and confusion around it.
All right, let's bring us into the next one.
Okay. Ooh,
This
this
one
is a
has
good one.
paragraphs.
Scaling pro. This is a real issue. Scaling pro services. This is one I didn't always solve, by the way. So, technical project manager at an MSP. He's tech support background. He does not have a formal project management background. Very involved with scoping, building the SOWs, doing the scheduling, all of that stuff, even doing this. So this is exactly what I did for a while. Company wants to elevate me into a more senior role and scale the pro services department, requires me to be less involved with projects. Yes. Really not sure on the best way to scale. As mentioned, I have the aptitude, but I know PM, but I am not a PMP. I assume that's what he meant. So basically, he's saying he is heavily involved in the day-to-day of projects, from conception to solution design to architecting to the SOW, all the way through implementation, project management, scheduling. And I assume at some point hands-on keyboard. Man, this is like an autobiography for a couple of years. And here's what I would say. In fact, that I think this can be a very concise one, at least in my opinion. I'm curious to hear your thoughts afterward, Josh. This is a telltale sign that his MSP pro services department works because of the person and not the process. That it's as simple as that, right? It's not written down, and maybe it's written down, but I'm guessing that a lot of it is still what ConnectWise would call the muscle and feel kind of phase in the entrepreneurial journey. I don't want to mention more about ConnectWise, but just you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. Yes, you might have a process written down, you're loosely following it, but the thing works because you are muscling through it as the pro services manager, not because you're following the process you documented. It's you. And until you can get that process down to the point where other people can do it, you inhibit the growth of this thing. And one of two things happen. One, the pro services department can only become so big, or two, this person now has to put in so many hours because he's the only person that can do all this stuff, that he just becomes overworked and totally burned out.
Yep. I mean, 100%. Like you can't scale without documented, repeatable processes. That's the first thing you need. And now I realize this comes from a privileged place, but if you're really looking to scale it, it needs to be separate from the MSP, and not like a different company, but like a different department. A project manager, engineers that only work on or mostly only work on the projects, and sometimes they are an escalation point, but the vast majority of their time should be on these projects. And you basically kind of generate your revenue with your pro serves. But all again, it all comes down and all starts with scalable, repeatable processes. So if you're overseeing that, start documenting those procedures, those how you want things done, how they should be done, scalable, and then make sure that either if you're going to be the PM or hire some sort of project manager, and they should take the admin tasks away from the engineers. Excuse me. So the engineers are able to focus solely on the work. That's my thoughts on it.
Also, that's not an if. There are a handful of engineers that can do their own PM, but once you start getting into like any kind of real project, you need a project manager, or at least someone who has a background in it. If you're trying to both do the work and project manage, yeah, you can do that for like a small project, like, 100-hour project. But when you start getting into real meaningfully large projects, you just can't do that anymore.
Yep, 100%. Having the communication.
And I think it's one of those things. Oh, sorry to cut you off, Josh.
Yeah, I was. With all the communication and all of the touching base, and having like this keeping the contracts and all that stuff. It's just too much for one person.
I think as MSPs, we sometimes get into this this mode of, because a lot of the things we do are relatively small scale, that we cut corners and do things that don't work when it gets to like real numbers. We do that. I see this in networks all the time, like with automation. You could, in theory, if you have to go make a change to the way you deployed some SaaS application across your clients, even if you have 500 clients, you're just eating somebody's one day to go make that change at every client.
Yep.
Whereas the right thing to do is usually, depending on the application, some kind of parent policy template or something like that. And I see all the time where that didn't get used because it's feasible to make that change in automation. Same thing kind of happens in the project world. For the most part, MSP projects are not very big. You're talking like 100 hours are some of the larger ones, maybe 150. And it's possible to project manage that yourself because it's really not huge. There's not that many steps. It's a very linear project path. There aren't a lot of dependencies. It's just very, one after the other thing. And so it kind of tricks us into not do. And by the way, I'm not saying that all the projects I do are big, right? The ones I did were that small too. It's not any kind of like I did bigger projects, but it's tempting to just kind of abandon like proper project management processes when when you can essentially track it in like a 2-column spreadsheet. And I did that too. I fell into that same trap. So just keep that in mind when you start thinking about, do I really need a project manager? Maybe not. Maybe your engineers can do it, but not every engineer can even deal with that like 2-column spreadsheet or whatever project management tool you're using. I know there's a million out there. But I would recommend, one, getting out of doing all the architecture yourself. I fell into that trap as well, where I was writing every SOW, doing all the technical design. Hey, all of a sudden now nobody else can do it, so that's fantastic. And two, I was even doing hands-on keyboard work for some of the projects as well. And you just got to let your team do it. Let your team write the proposals, let your team design the solution, let your team do the implementation. And you know what? If you as the manager are the best engineer, your structure is wrong. Once you get to the manager, your techs should be better technical people than you. Very, very hard to accept and get to. I know, Josh, I'm guessing you might have struggled with the same thing. As I became more of like a project manager and architect, you know what? I wasn't the best engineer on my team anymore. And I like to think I was. People thought I was. But if that were actually true, it means I had failed at my team composition.
Yeah, and that was again at one of the previous places. I mean, that was one of my biggest roles is especially when it came to anything Azure, Microsoft 365. Like I was the cloud person, so I was the one doing the pre-sales, the architecture, the scoping, the I mean the when I say quoting, I wrote everything, and then the account manager would copy paste, push send on the quoting thing, and get the signature, and then I would do the hands-on keyboard work, the project management, the post project, the follow-up. Like I did everything A to Z. And now it was awesome for me as an individual. Like I mean, it sucked to do all that work, but it was good to have that individual learning opportunity. But again, coming back from it from a business owner perspective, not a good thing. That shouldn't be the case, because then single point of failure, tribal knowledge, all of the things that you had mentioned. But yes, I know we've talked about it plenty of times on here before too. Like when you're in a management role, then yeah, you can definitely help with escalations and things like that, and help take a look. But you should be less focused on the day-to-day hands-on keyboard stuff and more on the business process and administrative side, and making those efficiencies and supporting your team.
And inevitably, even if when you first become a manager, you might still be the best technical person, it's not going to last long. It's just impossible to keep up with that if you're doing a full-time management role.
Exactly. So, all right, well, let's go ahead, and we got a couple more to get through here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the next one, entitled Managed Services Team. So this one's a little smaller here. Let's see what they are asking.
Need a summary from AI?
I got you. Yeah, the author is the sole managed services engineer at MSP with a large number of endpoints. The rest of the team, including help desk and field engineers, rely heavily on that managed services team for support and troubleshooting, leading to a significant workload to the author. The author questions whether it's this typical scenario in MSPs and expresses concern about potential impact and quality of service. Okay. Yes, this one is interesting. And sorry to keep the beating the old dead horse, but again, this is something one of my previous MSPs we had a managed services team, and we had an engineer team, and the engineer dealt mostly with the non-managed clients, like the break fix and projects, and the managed team we weren't a separate projects team like it is at my current MSP. It was literally just you you did the projects, you did break fix and that, and like kind of helped out wherever. Whereas anything from like if they had a managed contract, then it would go to the managed team, which was smaller. But yeah, it's to me, that's not a true MSP.
One thing that wasn't clear to me on this post, and excuse me, I'm curious your thoughts on it, is what did they mean by managed services engineer?
That's what
and the reason I say that is it could be what some organizations call centralized services, where it's someone who takes care of like the tools and the RMM and things like that, or do they mean it in like at face value, what you're talking about, where you have your managed clients and your, I don't want to say non-managed clients, but kind of non-managed clients, like your ad hoc work?
Yeah, it sounds like, to your point, so the AI summary failed me a little here, but it sounds like they're the ones that are in charge of deploying the tool. So I think this would be more of a centralized services role. Um, but if they're in
Okay.
that role, then why are they doing tickets?
Well, so depending on how the organization is structured, centralized service, and again, I'm just talking from my experience in a couple or many organizations I've seen, but this isn't how it works everywhere. In some orgs, centralized services are the only group that has permission to do things in certain tools. For
Yep.
example, to um, add a server to backup, or to more importantly, to delete a server from backup, or make an exception in EDR. Now, you may have a separate security team depending on scale, but all that stuff. But um, in small orgs, everyone can do everything in the RMM. As you start getting bigger and more formalized, the permissions get locked down more, such that you have to put in a ticket with CentOps or centralized services or whatever you call it, to do things like that, depending on what it is. So I that could be why they have tickets. Um, and I could see a very small department in that case. I mean, one is a really small department, but maybe they really do only need one. So that part may be typical, but again, we're making a big assumption here on what they mean by managed services team.
Yeah, this is I've read this like 5 different times and I'm still confused as to this. So it doesn't sound like they're doing like the triage or like the service desk tickets. Like it sounds like they're centralized services, which if there is an issue with the RMM, the patching, failed agents, resolving a failed backup, like that's all what they're supposed to be doing. Um, but it sounds like they might potentially need the assistance. Their workload is too high for that. But based on the definitions of what we had talked about in the centralized service, I mean, I'm not seeing anything out of the ordinary with this, so long as they're not taking like the phone calls and things.
It's a really tricky thing to get right, and I'll just mention where that starts to break down. Is you start thinking about your centralized services team. In theory, okay, we're going to say they're responsible for patching, they're responsible for backups. Where this gets tricky is, hey, this server is not taking backups, and now I schedule time on the server and coordinate with the client to reboot. And right, does the centralized services team handle that? Does the managed services team that the client is used to talking to handle that part?
Mhm.
Does like one person handle it on behalf of the other? That gets a little tricky because in some cases, your centralized services, especially things like patching, gets outsourced, like to a NOC or to someone who doesn't really have a lot of client communication opportunity. Um, so that gets a little complicated, and just every organization handles it a different way. But it is a little weird sometimes when you say that group is going to be responsible for patch, because yes, they should be, right? They'll fix the patch, but um, hey, I have to deal with this client constraint to do so, or deal with this line of business, or whatever, right? It gets complicated sometimes.
Yeah, I think it comes down to having or promoting the communication between the teams, and it doesn't sound like there's a healthy culture, unfortunately, at that MSP where people are saying, "Well, it's not my problem," and they're pushing that aside. Whereas we should be encouraging the teamwork to work together, and although it might not be in your job description, you're all on the same team, and there's that communication that should happen to work together, such as, hey, I need you to reach out to this client and schedule a reboot, or help me out with this particular thing. It's not so much doing your job for you, but just collaborating on an issue so you can solve it.
Yeah. Um, so I think the overall answer to this post, at least from my perspective, is it could be typical, but it really, really depends on what we're defining as
Yeah.
managed services team.
Yeah, I agree. That's it was an interesting one, and I don't. Hopefully, we gave a good enough answer to that. But We got some quick two quick ones here that are a little more
I will say
lighthearted to
one
end the
final
show.
thing
Go
on
ahead.
that. If the definition of managed services team is like what you were saying, the original, like taking care of the managed customers, one person can't do that. And even if they could, it's such a
Mhm.
huge risk that they absolutely should not be doing that.
Well, I know when like I'm thinking about like our internal architecture because we do have a centralized service and his main job is backups and in charge of the RMM tool and pushing out software and making sure that that's fine. But we count that as part of the MSP team. I mean, when we're doing our presentations to prospects, we show them how the team is made up, and hey, by hiring us, you get a technical account manager, VCIO, the security services team, and the service desk, and then centralized services is kind of part of that whole picture.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's all part of the MSP team. I don't know. I guess that I'm feeling that there's some sort of disconnect, and I it seems like it's coming from the top down on hey, we're not on the same team, so it's not my problem. I'm going to push it to someone else.
When you get sorry, I know we have to move on. When you get like bigger, and again, there are lots of MSPs that were bigger than what I came from, although I did come from a pretty decently sized one. Centralized, they do become a totally separate team with separate management, except the budget for their salaries comes out of managed services agreements still.
Hmm.
But you
Yeah,
do run
it's
into that interdepartmental challenge, kind of the same way that professional services and managed services runs into sometimes about like who's going to deal with this as a part of the project. Same thing happens with central services when they're separate. That when you're bigger.
so. Yeah, it was an interesting one. That's not something that we've covered on this show before. So,
I
kudos
like
to
it. It's a
that
good
post.
discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, So in this vein here, going into the next one, what are your thoughts on about this? This came from the sysadmin subreddit, but it's something that it might be relevant to the MSP community. Are we all just becoming SaaS admins? More and more of the job is just setting up and creating SaaS products with APIs, and less about building full end-to-end solutions. So is this the future? Do you think we're getting more simplified with this?
So I think this talks about something we've talked about on the show before, related to techs that don't have a understanding about architecture just because they haven't been exposed to it. I'm going to laser in though on something in that post, and that is even though we're doing it with SaaS applications and APIs now, the job has always been end-to-end solutions and still is. It's just that the way that that happens now is different and frankly simplified. And you've probably heard me say this if you've ever been to one of my presentations, and I think I've said it on the show. What it means is, as MSPs, we have to start doing what we say we've been doing the whole time, which is consultative business work. It's just that before, the technology was difficult enough that deciding like, do you want a new server, or like a SAN or a cluster or whatever, or like all that stuff got in the way of the business consulting part. And now that we're not spending all of our time figuring out fiber channel versus iSCSI or direct SaaS connection anymore, now we got to start ponying up and doing the actual business work that we tell our clients we've been doing the whole time.
Yep.
So there's my
And
soapbox
it's
moment.
yeah, it's allowing us to focus more on the business side and less on the technology side. I mean, really marrying the two on how does the technology support the business, which is why we're seeing such a pivot into more of like the cybersecurity side of things or the compliance side of things, because how do you solve for those using technology? But the other side of this, and one of the things I want to hold on to, is like it's still a system. You can still administrator it. Microsoft 365 as a SaaS application, but
Mhm.
Microsoft 365 tenant management is something that I feel doesn't get trained enough. I mean, it's more of a trial by fire, and people know how to do the basics, but I don't feel that there's enough people that know how to properly harden or monitor a tenant in a proper way. And I know for a fact with our local college here, there's a couple of friends in my tech community that I talk to on a daily basis, and one of them is on the board that gets to decide what the curriculum is, and the other one is an actual adjunct professor, and they're teaching. Obviously, you need things like Active Directory and networking and things like that. But I brought up the question like, when are you going to start teaching Microsoft 365 management? Because I feel that is more relevant, especially in small to medium businesses, than Active Directory. If you have previously, whatever, I'm just going to throw out a number, 10, 15 years ago, maybe less than that. I don't know. Time's a construct, but every business needed Active Directory. But now that's not the case. I mean, especially for a lot of smaller businesses, there is no need to have an Active Directory server because of these SaaS applications. But if all your loan is Active Directory and then you're thrown into an environment who doesn't have one, how the hell do you manage it? You trial by fire, and that's why we have all these misconfigurations and things like that. So I think my soapbox is we need more Microsoft 365 training or Google Workspace. Same thing. I mean, that's so yes, you could potentially, instead of a system admin, you're a SaaS admin, whatever you want to call it. It's still a system, but we just need to refocus our thinking around it.
I mean, it's going the same way that all technology cycles go, right? How long ago was it that we would do things like install an Exchange server for a 7-person business because that's kind of what you had to do to get your own email, at least that you controlled. Those days are gone, thankfully.
Oh.
All right, now we install SendMail instead. No, kidding.
I never want to work on an Exchange server again, please.
But technology changes, and yes, we are managing SaaS more than we are building big complex environment. Now, big clients that might still have internal data centers, yeah, maybe there's still some of that going on. Not as much anymore. Or as we start to have like hybrid environments, like some stuff just doesn't really run well in the SaaS application, or the SaaS equivalent is missing some features. But that's getting less and less common, and especially anything new, you're going all SaaS from day one. So I agree with the premise that it is changing, but I think we're both saying yes, the how is changing, but ultimately we're still doing the same thing we've always done.
Yep.
Helping businesses.
Absolutely. So the last one here is more of a tongue-in-cheek to send us home on a light note. So this is another post from our sysadmin. This person says, hot take: all employees should have a basic IT common sense before being allowed into the workplace. I'm talking about computer fundamentals, not anything that's support. The amount of times that I get asked to help someone do simple stuff like use Excel worksheet, or right clicking on things is ridiculous. So what do you think about this? This is a tale as old as time here.
That sounds nice. So yes, I get where this is coming from, because I too have been frustrated with somebody on the other end of the phone that doesn't know how to do some basic task and uses us as training as opposed to technical support. Here, the business reality, though, is if your best whatever task that you're hiring for, a creative person might be a bad example, or finance person, insurance adjuster, whatever, if they're really, really, really freaking good at their job and don't have basic computer skills, guess what? They're getting hired anyway, and you're just going to have to deal with it as tech support.
I know that was one of the things where it's like, how, like, using a computer is part of your job, and how do you not know how to use like a job function? It's like if you're hiring a mechanic who doesn't know how to use whatever, a wrench or something like that. Like, it's just part of their job. But that, I mean, to your point too, like if someone provides enough value to the company, then it's just something that we're going to have to deal with. And hey, that's good news for for us. It keeps us employed, right? If people don't,
that's true.
If everyone knew how to use the computer and all that, then what would we do? So
yeah, I mean, I do get the sentiment, but I always felt that this was one of those like man yelling at clouds things. It's just not going to change.
Oh yeah, it'll be it'll always be something, some sort of contention. But that being said, there is a point though where I mean, we could talk about the MSP side, where if you have a client who's continual, like putting tickets, like how do I write this Excel formula, or like
Yes.
something similar, something like that. I know there was one where we had to, we got a ticket because this lady was in charge of the social media for the company and she didn't know how to do something on Facebook. So she submitted a ticket with us. And I'm like, this is like so far outside of the scope of our work. Like, we can't show you how to do your job for you, unfortunately. And it did came with we talked to the manager. We're like, hey, we recommend just basic computer fundamental training for this person.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's such a good point. Like, as I'm sitting here talking about how doomed we all are, that the computer literacy is not going to improve on the average employee necessarily. That being said, to your point, that doesn't mean that your support people have to be trainers, right? There definitely is a conversation to be had about making sure that you are clear and setting boundaries with your clients, that you're not there to do production work or to do operational tasks for them or to do anyone's job for them or even to be trainers. You're there to support. Now, if somebody occasionally asks for help, that's different. If somebody starts abusing it, that is a good opportunity to either get some help the client find some formal training, maybe some videos, maybe some books, whatever style works for them, and draw the line somewhere so that your techs don't spend all of their time doing remedial, here's how to use the stuff training. And for most of us, we don't know how to use the line of business software anyway, right? We know how to use Office, but I had a big insurance carrier as a client. I didn't know the first thing about using their actual application except for how to install it or what to do when the printer function broke, because that was the only thing I ever did in that.
Yep. I know that was a struggle that I had going back to Excel. Is like, and again, I don't want to brag because I mean, I don't want to get any DMs asking how to write this Excel formula, but I'm fairly proficient in Excel because I like pretty spreadsheets and doing things like that. So when I get that ticket, I'd be like, do I do this because I know how to do it? Or do I just tell them this is outside the scope of work, because that means I'm going to get more of these Excel tickets, and unless I can't do my job because I'm stuck writing these formulas, like, and it's not my job. So it's like,
so what'd you do?
I'm not the right thing.
You did it, didn't you? You helped them.
I did it for the people that I liked, and I was literally like, hey, I'm only doing this as a favor because I know how to do this and like I've done this before. But for the people that weren't, even like, hey, yeah, I'm sorry, this isn't something that we can help with. I can help you if Excel won't load or if it's broken, but as far as usability, then that's outside our scope. So not the right answer, but I gotta be honest, that's
phrases that clients are blind to. As a one-time courtesy, yeah, they don't read that part.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So don't do what I did. Perfect. Hey, well, we did it with 1 minute to spare, so we filled the hour.
All right.
Get some plugs in. What do you got coming up this next week, or what's going on in your world?
It's really kind of year-end stuff and planning for me. So not a lot that would be public or that things would see. So nothing new for me except for normal LinkedIn posts and I'll just be around kind of stuff. How about you?
We got our last IR game of the year coming up on December 20th, where we're doing the I believe it's the business email compromise, which is a fairly new scenario for us. So please sign up for that. I just posted the sign up link in the chat. It is completely free, and we'll take you through the ins and outs of an incident in a way you've never seen before. So please check that out. Other than that, we will see you next week then.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP Media Network.